helicopters hovering overhead, and the guard dispersed the crowd from the area. Students attempted to demonstrate that the curfew was unnecessary by peacefully marching towards the town, but were met by guardsmen. Students then staged a spontaneous sit-in at the intersection of East Main and Lincoln Streets and demanded that the mayor and the KSU president speak with them about the guards' presence on the campus. Assured that this demand would be met, the crowd agreed to move from the street and onto the front lawn of the campus. The guard then betrayed the students and announced that the curfew would go into effect immediately. Helicopters and tear gas were used to disperse the demonstrators. As the crowd attempted to escape, some were bayoneted and clubbed by guardsmen. Students were again pursued and prodded back to their dormitories. Tear gas inundated the campus, and helicopters with searchlights hovered overhead all night. Monday, May 4th, 1970. At 11 a.m., about 200 students gathered on the Commons. Earlier that morning, state and local officials had met in Kent. Some officials had assumed that Governor Rhodes had declared martial law to be in effect, but he had not. In fact, martial law was not officially declared until May 5th. Nevertheless, the National Guard resolved to disperse any assembly. As noon approached, the size of the crowd increased to 1,500. Some were merely spectators, while others had gathered specifically to protest the invasion of Cambodia and the continued presence of the National Guard on the campus. Upon orders of Ohio's Assistant Adjutant General Robert Canterbury, an army jeep was driven in front of the assembled students. The students were told by means of a bullhorn to disperse immediately. Students responded with jeers and chants. When the students refused to disperse, General Canterbury ordered the guardsmen to disperse them. Approximately 116 men, equipped with loaded M1 rifles and tear gas, formed a skirmish line towards the students. Aware of bayonet injuries of the previous evening, students immediately ran away from the attacking National Guardsmen. Retreating up Blanket Hill, some students lobbed tear gas canisters back at the advancing troops, and one straggler was attacked with clubs. The guard, after clearing the Commons, marched over the crest of the hill, firing tear gas and scattering students into a wider area. The guard then continued marching down the hill and onto a practice football field. For approximately 10 minutes, the guard stayed in this position. During this time, tear gas canisters were thrown back and forth from the guard's position to a small group of students in the Prentice Hall parking lot, about 100 yards away. Some students responded to the guardsmen's attack by throwing stones. Guardsmen also threw stones at the students, however, were spectators of the veranda of Taylor Hall. Oh, I skipped a line. Most stones from both parties fell short of their targets. The vast majority of students, however, were spectators on the veranda of Taylor Hall. While on the practice field, several members of Troop G, which would within minutes fire the fatal volley, knelt and aimed their weapons at the students in the parking lot. General Canterbury concluded the crowd had been dispersed and ordered the guard to march back to the Commons area. Some members of Troop G then huddled briefly. After reassembling on the field, the guardsmen seemed to begin to retreat as they marched back up the hill, retracting their previous steps. Members of Troop G, while advancing up the hill, continued to glance back at the parking lot where the most militant and vocal students were located. The students assumed the confrontation was over. Many of the students began to walk to their next classes. As the guard reached the crest of Blanket Hill near the pagoda of Taylor Hall, about a dozen members of Troop G simultaneously turned around 180 degrees, aimed and fired their weapons into the crowd in the Prentice Hall parking lot. The 1975 civil trials proved that there was a verbal command to fire. A total of 67 shots were fired in 13 seconds. 4 students, Allison Krause, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, and William Schroeder, were killed. 9 students were wounded: Joseph Lewis, John Cleary, Thomas Grace, Robbie Stamps, Donald Scott McKenzie, Alan Canfora, Douglas Rentmore, James Russell, and Dean Kaler. Of the wounded, 1 was permanently paralyzed, and several were seriously maimed. all were full.